When I walked into the restaurant, I thought I had the wrong place. The clatter of silverware had already gone quiet. The plates were scraped clean, and the kind of laughter that stops when you appear still hung faintly in the air like smoke after a match has burned out. My sister Amber didn't stand. Her husband didn't either. Neither did his parents. They just looked at me with identical expressions. Polished, expectant, amused. Amber lifted the leather billfolder between two fingers and tossed it toward me as casually as someone flicking lint off a sleeve. $900, she said, voice sharp enough to slice. Come on, Liv, you're the rich one. Her mother-in-law let out a laugh that sounded like a fork scraping bone. All she's good for is opening her wallet. And they laughed. At me, around me, through me. It took me 3 seconds to understand. I had never been invited to join their dinner. I'd been invited to finance it. The humiliation should have burned. Instead, something inside me went cold, steady, deliberate. I stood, pushed in my chair, and called for the manager. The moment I did, Amber's smirk twitched, and for the first time that night, her eyes flickered with something that almost looked like fear. None of them knew that $900 was the least expensive thing they were about to lose. I didn't say a word as the manager approached. I simply stepped aside, letting the silence tighten around the table like a noose. My pulse thudded in my ears, but my voice when I finally spoke was quiet and controlled. There's been a mistake, I said. This dinner isn't on me. Amber's breath caught. Liv, don't be dramatic. But the manager held up a hand. Ma'am, he said, addressing me with practiced calm, we can sort this out privately if you'd like. Privately. Exactly what I wanted. I followed him toward the side hallway near the wine display, every instinct in me humming. When he shut the door behind us, I inhaled deeply, collected myself and scanned the bill. $900, 5 entrees, 2 bottles of overpriced wine, dessert, coffee. All consumed before I'd even arrived. They said you were covering the cost? He asked. No, I said. I wasn't present for the meal and did not authorize anything. I'd like the charges addressed with the people who placed the order. The manager nodded slowly. Behind the door I could hear faint whispers, fast, nervous. Understood, he said. I'll handle it. But before he could leave the room, something in me shifted. I wasn't done. Not with them, not with the truth, and not with Amber. Not anymore. Actually, I said, could you call security to stand by? I expect this may escalate. He blinked, then nodded again. Of course. When I stepped back into the dining room, the entire table went stiff. Amber's husband stiffened as if bracing for a tidal wave. His parents were pale as candle wax. Amber herself. She looked irritated. Not ashamed, not caught. I studied her face, the tight jaw, the rehearsed eyebrow tilt, the glare laced with false concern. And for the first time I saw the calculation behind her eyes. This wasn't impulsive cruelty, this was strategy. And that realization frightened me more than the bill, more than the laughter, more than the humiliation. Olivia, Amber said sweetly, playing to the small crowd of remaining diners. You're embarrassing yourself. Just pay it so we can all go home. Something inside me snapped into place, quietly, cleanly. No, I said. Her mouth fell open. She wasn't used to no, not from me. The manager returned with security in tow. The charges will be reassigned to the party who ordered, he told the table. If there's a dispute, we can contact the authorities. Amber's facade wobbled. Authorities? You're calling the police over dinner? It appears, the manager replied, that the guest you attempted to bill was not invited to eat with you. A tense silence strangled the air. Thomas, her father-in-law, flushed dark red. This is ridiculous, he muttered. We're respectable people. I almost laughed. Respectable people don't ambush family with luxury dinner bills. Security escorted them to the front to settle the charge. Amber glared daggers at me as she passed, her expression twisting into something venomous. "You'll regret this," she hissed under her breath. I didn't react. I simply watched them leave the room in a tight, angry line, like a parade marching toward its own undoing. When the door shut behind them, the shaky breath I'd been holding escaped. I sat down. My hands trembled slightly, but not from fear, from clarity. Because in that moment, alone at the table they'd used as a stage for my humiliation, I knew exactly what had really happened. This wasn't about the dinner. It wasn't even about money. This had been a test. Not the first one, just the latest. And suddenly, memories burst open like cracks in a dam. My parents' deaths, the inheritance, the sudden warmth from Amber afterward, the strange incidents these past few years, her urging me to sign minor paperwork, her staging emergencies, her repeating to relatives that I'd been acting unstable, the way her husband's family examined my home the first time they visited, as if evaluating a property for sale instead of sharing a meal. None of it was coincidence. This dinner had been an escalation, a rehearsal for something bigger, a step toward something catastrophic, and I had walked right into the center of it. The restaurant was empty now, lights dimming. I left a tip on the table for the busboy. He'd given me a sympathetic look earlier. But before I stepped out into the chilly air, the manager caught up to me. "Ma'am," he said gently. "I've seen things like this before. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry." I nodded. "Thank you." "It's not your fault," he added softly. "People like that. They choose their target very carefully." I swallowed hard. "I know." Outside, the cold hit my face like a slap, but it helped. It cleared my head. My car sat beneath a street lamp, its metallic blue paint reflecting the empty lot. I climbed inside, locked the doors automatically, and sat gripping the steering wheel. $900. 9 years since Mom and Dad passed. 9,000 red flags I should have seen. I drove home in silence, the headlights slicing through the dark Wyoming night. With every mile, the truth grew sharper. Amber wasn't jealous. She wasn't petty. She wasn't overwhelmed. She was planning. She was preparing something. And I had nearly let her do it. When I stepped into my house, a historic farmhouse my parents left to me, an unfamiliar chill swept through me. The shadows seemed deeper, the silence heavier. I locked the door, then every other door, then the windows. Only when I reached the kitchen did I notice what I'd been avoiding since dinner. My mother's old letterbox sat on the counter, the one I'd refused to open for 2 years. The one Margaret Reeves, Mom's attorney, kept urging me to read. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. I lifted the lid with trembling fingers. On top was an envelope in my mother's handwriting. For Olivia. When your heart knows something is wrong, trust it. My throat tightened. Underneath the letter lay documents, official ones, sealed packets, a small hard drive, and a note written in my mother's calm, familiar script. If Amber ever tries to take from you what is yours, call Margaret immediately, and do not face them alone. My hands shook so hard the note fluttered. I sank into a chair. She knew. Years ago, she knew. A cold wind rattled the window pane. I wasn't paranoid. I wasn't overreacting. I wasn't imagining the manipulation, the attempted isolation, the subtle digs about my memory or stress or instability. Amber had been building a story about me, a narrative, a legal foundation, and I had just ruined her test run in front of a restaurant full of witnesses. I whispered into the empty room, "What were you planning, Amber?" But I already knew the answer. She wanted my house, my land, my inheritance, everything our parents left me, and tonight's dinner bill was just the beginning. I rose from the table, the envelope still pressed to my chest, and walked toward the phone. It was time to call Margaret. It was time to learn the truth my mother left behind. It was time to understand exactly how long this betrayal had been unfolding. And more importantly, what Amber was willing to do next. Because one thing was certain, she wasn't done, not even close. I didn't sleep the night after the restaurant. I tried, God knows I tried. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw Amber's smile as she tossed the $900 bill toward me, the way her mother-in-law leaned back with that satisfied smirk, the way the whole table seemed to wait for me to crumble. By 3 a.m, I gave up. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at the envelope my mother had left me like it was some kind of detonator. Maybe it was. The sun rose slow and pale over the Wyoming fields, brushing soft gold across the frost-glazed windows. I watched the light spill over the land my parents had loved so fiercely. The land Amber now wanted. The house Amber now wanted. The assets Amber had been circling like a hawk for years. My coffee had gone cold when I finally picked up the phone and dialed Margaret Reeves. The moment she answered, her voice was steady, warm, and somehow already prepared. "Olivia," she said, as if she'd been expecting this call. "Are you all right?" "I think I need to see you," I said. "Today." A pause. A long one. Then, "Come in at 10 and bring whatever your mother left you." 10 couldn't come fast enough. I showered, dressed, gathered the letters, and placed everything in a folder. Before leaving, I stood in the doorway of my parents' bedroom, a room I'd kept almost untouched since they passed. For a moment, I let myself hope I was overthinking. Maybe Amber was just being Amber. Maybe it wasn't as dark as I feared. But then I saw her face again. Smug, certain, rehearsed. No, I wasn't wrong. I locked the house and drove toward town. Margaret's law office sat in a brick building downtown, the kind with creaky hardwood floors and windows that rattled when Wyoming winds picked up. She met me in the lobby and pulled me into a hug that I didn't know I needed. "You look exhausted," she said. "I feel worse." "Let's go to my office." Her office was cozy, cluttered with books, legal pads filled with her looping handwriting, and a photograph of her and my mother laughing on a hiking trail. My throat tightened when I saw it. "Don't look at me like that," Margaret said gently. "Your mom left us both with things to carry." I placed the folder on her desk. "I think she knew something. I think she knew years ago." "She did," Margaret said simply. "Sit." I sat. She opened the folder, scanning the papers with the eyes of someone who already had answers, but needed confirmation. She pulled out the sealed packet, the letter, the hard drive, and then she sighed. "I was afraid this day would come," she murmured. "What is all of this?" I asked. "Why did she leave it for me? What did she know about Amber?" Margaret didn't answer right away. Instead, she opened a drawer, pulled out a thick file with my mother's name written on the tab, and placed it in front of me. "Your mother was a brilliant woman, Olivia. She understood people, she observed patterns, and after your father passed, she noticed changes." "What kind of changes?" "Amber's behavior," Margaret said softly. "Especially around your inheritance." I felt my stomach twist. I always thought she was just jealous, competitive, Amber. "No," Margaret said firmly. "Your sister isn't jealous. She's strategic." The room seemed to tilt. Margaret continued, "Your mother had reason to believe Amber was planning to slowly undermine you, emotionally, financially, and legally, until she could force your assets into shared control." "But why? My parents left us equal sentimental things. Amber got jewelry, personal items, the scrapbooks." I swallowed hard. "She said that's what she wanted." "Of course she said that," Margaret replied. "It allowed her to look generous, reasonable, above reproach. Meanwhile, she pushed you to keep everything with real value, property, land, investments, the very things someone could target." I leaned back, stunned. "She didn't want the house back then." "She did," Margaret corrected, "but she wanted it when you were more vulnerable, when it would be easy to take." My mother's envelope suddenly felt heavier than lead. Margaret opened the sealed packet. Inside were notes, pages of them, in my mother's handwriting. Dates, incidents, observations, things I'd forgotten or brushed off. Your mother noticed every time Amber spoke over you, every time Amber framed your independence as forgetfulness, every time Amber commented on your work stress in front of family. Margaret flipped a page. Amber told Olivia she should let her handle her finances because she seems overwhelmed. She looked up at me. Do you remember that? Vaguely. I remembered the moment, but not the weight of it. I remembered Amber laughing, brushing it off. I'd laughed too. That wasn't a joke, Margaret said. She was laying groundwork. Groundwork. The word hit me like a hammer. That's exactly what it felt like. The bill at the restaurant, the humiliation. None of it was random. It was a pattern. Margaret pulled out another envelope, with the logo of a private investigative firm stamped on the corner. My breath caught. She hired an investigator? Yes, Margaret said. Your mother wanted to know what Amber and her in-laws were capable of, whether her instincts were correct. And they were. She slid the report toward me. Inside were photographs, screenshots, transcripts of Amber's conversations, notes on her husband's parents' financial history, a foreclosure they'd quietly dodged years earlier, a bankruptcy, a failed business, legal disputes, patterns of befriending older individuals with significant assets, patterns of suggesting shared ownership, patterns of filing for guardianship. Guardianship. My blood went cold. That's for incapacitated people, I whispered. Yes, Margaret said quietly. And your mother worried Amber might try to prove you incapacitated. Not tomorrow, not immediately, but eventually, slowly, carefully, after years of staging incidents that made you appear unstable or irresponsible. My hands shook as I flipped through the pages. There, highlighted, was a note from the investigator cataloging the specific behavioral tests Amber had used on others before. Test generosity with small expenses. Test emotional responses by provoking embarrassment. Test boundary strength. Test financial compliance. Test public humiliation tolerance. The dinner bill slammed into my memory like a fist. Oh my God, I whispered. That was a test. Yes, Margaret said. A very big one. And you failed it. I looked up sharply. I failed? In her eyes, Olivia. You failed because you didn't react the way she expected. You pushed back. You refused. You asserted control. Margaret folded her hands. Amber needs you compliant, predictable, afraid. She needs you to feel guilty, to feel indebted to her, or, ideally, unstable. I felt sick. She's been painting me as unstable? For years. The room was too small, too warm, too full of truths I didn't want to hear. Margaret reached across the desk and touched my hand. Your mother saw this coming. That's why she left you a trust. I blinked. A trust? Yes, a protective trust. One Amber cannot break, one her husband's family cannot manipulate, one designed to activate if anyone attempts to take advantage of you, financially or legally. The words echoed in the quiet room. Activate how? I asked. By freezing your assets, preventing unauthorized transfers, blocking co-ownership changes, and, most importantly, triggering an automatic legal defense protocol through my office. So, if Amber tries to take my house, she'll hit a wall, a hard one. And if she tries to claim I'm incompetent, she'll trigger a full investigation she cannot control. I exhaled shakily. My mother protected me. Margaret smiled softly. Your mother built a fortress around you. I didn't know whether to cry or scream. I turned to the final part of the packet, a small handwritten note from my mother. I opened it. My Liv, if Amber ever attempts to make you doubt yourself, or suggests you need her to manage your life, understand this. She is not helping you. She is weakening you. Please trust Margaret. And remember, no one owns you. No one is entitled to what you have built. No one has the right to the life your father and I wanted for you. If Amber chooses another path, let her walk it alone. My vision blurred. Margaret waited patiently as I read it twice, then pressed it to my chest. When I finally looked up, she said quietly, "There's something else." "Something worse?" Margaret hesitated. "A rare thing." "Yes." She reached into the file cabinet behind her and withdrew a thin folder marked Recent. "I didn't contact you before because nothing was confirmed, but 2 weeks ago I received a notice." "What kind of notice?" "An inquiry." "From who?" "The county clerk's office." She opened the folder. "Someone requested information about the legal process for filing for guardianship." The room spun. "Guardianship of who?" Her eyes met mine. "You, Olivia." For a full 5 seconds, I forgot how to breathe. Someone had already begun the process. Someone had already laid the groundwork. "Amber," I whispered. "We don't know that yet," Margaret said carefully. "But the request was made the same day Amber visited an estate lawyer she's used before." A cold numbness spread through me. "She wants to take everything," I murmured. "She wants control," Margaret corrected gently. "The assets are a bonus." I leaned back in the chair, my heart pounding like a trapped bird. "Margaret," I said softly, "what do I do now?" "You prepare," she replied, "because if Amber was bold enough to stage a $900 public humiliation, she's closer to making her move than you realize." I swallowed hard. "Will you help me?" Margaret squeezed my hand. "I promised your mother I would." The clock on the wall ticked, a slow, ominous metronome. Margaret continued, "We have to be careful. Amber is impulsive but not stupid. Her in-laws are desperate but cunning. They'll accelerate now that they know you're not compliant." "So what do we do?" "We reinforce the trust protections. We document everything. You follow my instructions exactly, and Olivia—" She paused. "You cannot confront Amber alone. Not yet. That will only escalate her." I closed my eyes. What if she comes to me? She will, and soon. She'll try to seem helpful, loving. She'll try to convince you the guardianship conversation is for your own good. She'll twist your own life against you. And if I refuse? She'll twist that too. I let out a trembling breath. Margaret finished quietly. "Your mother saw Amber clearly. Now you must see her too." I stood slowly. "What if it's already too late?" Margaret shook her head. "It isn't. Because now you know the rules of the game, and Amber doesn't know you're playing." Her words steadied me. I gathered my things, hugged her again, and left the office with a new burning clarity. Amber didn't want a reconciliation. Amber didn't want a relationship. Amber wanted ownership. She thought she had time. She thought I was blind. She thought I was weak. But now I knew. And I wasn't going to let her take anything else from me, or from the life my parents fought to give me. When I got home that evening, my phone buzzed with a text from Amber. "Hey, Liv, need to talk. Stopping by tomorrow morning. Don't make plans." I stared at the message for a long time. The war had begun. I woke before the sun, the sky still dark, the house still silent, my body buzzing with the kind of tension that had nowhere to go. I didn't need an alarm. My mind had shaken me awake long before it could ring. Amber's text from the night before sat on my phone screen like a threat dressed as a courtesy. "Need to talk. Stopping by tomorrow morning. Don't make plans." That was Amber. A command posing as a request. An intrusion disguised as concern. A move already made before I even knew I was on the board. I dressed slowly, moving through the house with the careful attention of someone preparing for a storm. I boiled water for tea. I straightened the mail on the counter. I double-checked that the folder from Margaret was still tucked safely inside the drawer beneath the silverware tray. Every few minutes I checked the window, expecting to see Amber's car pull into the long gravel drive. But the drive stayed empty. My quiet home, built by my father's hands and my mother's vision, felt suddenly fragile, as if one wrong knock might shake its walls loose. By 8:45, I stopped pretending to clean and sat on the couch, hands clasped so tightly they ached. At 9 on the dot, I heard tires crunching across gravel. Right on time. Amber didn't believe in coincidence. I stood as the knock echoed, 3 sharp raps. Confident, entitled, rehearsed. When I opened the door, she was already smiling her picture-perfect smile, the one she used for holiday cards and social media posts, the one she thought made her look like a polished, put-together wife from a polished, put-together family. "Liv!" she exclaimed, as if we were close, as if she hadn't humiliated me 48 hours earlier. "Oh, good, you're up." She walked past me before I invited her in. I didn't stop her. Not yet. She'd expect a reaction, and I wasn't giving her one. Amber scanned my living room like she always did, her eyes flitting over furniture, decor, photographs, as if deciding what she'd keep and what she'd upgrade once she had control of the place. "Your house is so cozy," she said brightly. Cozy, the word people used when they couldn't bring themselves to say old or outdated. I said nothing. She turned to me, still smiling. "So, we need to clear the air." "About the dinner?" I asked quietly. Her smile strained but held. "Well, that... and other things. You overreacted a bit, don't you think?" "I didn't eat," I replied. "You left me the bill." Amber waved a manicured hand. "Oh, come on, Liv. You make more than all of us combined. And it's family. Why is this suddenly a big deal?" "It wasn't sudden," I said. "It was deliberate." Her eyes sharpened, quick, controlled, calculating. "What are you talking about?" "You tell me." She waited a beat, then shifted strategies so smoothly it was almost impressive. The tone softened, the shoulders drooped slightly, the performance switched from dismissive to wounded. "Olivia, you've been under a lot of stress. I know your job is hectic. I know living way out here alone isn't good for your mental health, and I know you've had... struggles." I froze. There it was. The crack in the mask, the line she'd been rehearsing. The path to guardianship always began with manufactured concern. "Struggles," I repeated evenly. "What struggles?" "You know," she said gently. "The episodes, the forgetfulness, the emotional instability." I stared at her. "Name one." She blinked. Then she blinked again. "Well," she floundered, "I don't keep a list." "Don't you?" I asked quietly. She swallowed. Hard. She hadn't expected me to be this direct, this steady. She'd wanted me defensive, confused, guilty. Instead, I was calm, too calm for her comfort. She pressed on anyway. "Look, Liv, this is exactly what I mean. You're getting intense." Intense. Another stepping stone word. They always used soft accusations first. "Amber," I said, "why are you here?" She straightened, her posture shifting into the strong, authoritative stance she used when she thought she was taking control. "Because we need to protect you." "From what?" "Yourself," she said simply. I exhaled slowly. "There's nothing wrong with me." "That's what worries me," she answered, her voice dripping with false empathy. "You're not aware of it. You don't see the signs." "Signs of what?" She reached into her purse, a large leather designer tote that looked suspiciously new, and pulled out a document. She laid it on the coffee table like a dealer laying down a winning hand. My breath caught when I saw the heading. Shared Property Responsibility Agreement. My parents' house listed at the top. My name. A blank line where hers was meant to go. Another blank where Ethan's would go. And a notary signature line at the bottom. "What is this?" I asked, keeping my voice low. "A simple agreement," she said. "Nothing major, just something to make things easier. For the future." "Whose future?" "Everyone's, especially yours." She pushed the papers toward me. "Liv, you live in this huge house alone. You struggle to maintain it. You're not good with paperwork or bills. You get overwhelmed." I stared at her. "I'm a structural engineer." "And that's wonderful," she said brightly. "But knowing how to build bridges doesn't mean you know how to manage an estate." "I've managed this one for years." "Barely." My fingers curled. "Amber, why do you need me to sign this?" Her smile slipped. Because you need help, and we're your family. And if something happened to you, she paused dramatically, we'd have no legal right to protect your interests. That's why shared responsibility is so important. And you want your name on my deed, I said plainly. Her jaw twitched. For your safety. No. The word dropped like a stone. Amber inhaled sharply. Liv, no. She stared at me, her expression flickering with disbelief, then irritation, then calculation. She wasn't used to being denied, not by me, not by anyone. You're making a mistake, she said quietly. You're letting your emotions cloud your judgment. I'm not emotional. You're angry. No, I said. I'm aware. A beat of silence passed. Something cold entered Amber's eyes. Something I'd never quite seen before. Cruelty without disguise. Ambition without the smile. Fine, she murmured. If you don't want help, that's your choice. She stood, gathering the documents with a snap. But when things get worse, and they will, I won't be the one responsible. Worse? I repeated. What do you think is going to happen to me? Amber lifted her bag and moved toward the door. Liv, you can't keep pretending everything's okay. People are starting to notice. Who? Neighbors, friends, Ethan, Mom's old friends. Everyone thinks you've been slipping. She said it lightly, but the implication hung heavy. You know what? She added, pausing at the door. I'll give you a few days to calm down, then we'll revisit the paperwork. She opened the door, then turned back. And Liv? Her voice softened into syrup. The longer you resist, the harder this will be for everyone. She left without waiting for an answer. I locked the door behind her, not because I feared she'd come back, but because I needed to feel for 1 second that something in my house was still under my control. Inside the quiet, my legs went weak and I sat on the floor, back against the door, heart pounding. She wasn't hiding it anymore. She'd laid the foundation so clearly even I couldn't deny it now. Step 1, create a narrative of instability. Step 2, pressure me into co-ownership. Step 3, prove I needed supervision. Step 4, file for guardianship. Step 5, take everything. I sat there for a long moment, breathing hard, letting the weight of her words settle. People are starting to notice. That was not a warning. That was a threat. And a flex. Amber wanted me to know she'd been whispering behind my back, that she'd been scripting a version of me that didn't exist, that she'd been preparing witnesses long before I realized I was the target. My stomach twisted. I stood and walked straight to the drawer beneath the silverware tray. I pulled out my mother's letter again. My hands were steadier this time, as if reading her words again would anchor me or armor me. I opened the envelope. Liv, if she ever comes to you with paperwork, it has begun. My breath shook. Do not sign anything. I pressed the letter to my chest. Mom, I whispered, you knew. I wasn't alone. She had prepared me. She had prepared Margaret. She had prepared everything. And now I had to prepare too. My next call was immediate. Margaret answered on the first ring. She came, I said. She brought documents. What kind? Shared ownership. A beat of silence. Then Margaret said, voice suddenly razor sharp, Olivia, listen to me carefully. I'm listening. You need to document everything, every conversation, every message, every visit. I am. Good, because this is escalation. She's moving faster than expected. I swallowed hard. What do I do now? You do nothing, Margaret said. You wait, and you stay calm. They will make the next move, and when they do, they'll reveal their strategy. I leaned heavily against the counter. Margaret, she said people think I'm unstable. Of course she did, Margaret murmured. That's how the narrative begins. But don't worry, we're ahead of her, and she doesn't know that. I closed my eyes. It feels like a war. It is, Margaret said simply. But Olivia, your mother built your defenses long before Amber built her attack. When I hung up, I exhaled slowly, finally steady. For the rest of the day, I cleaned the house. Not because it needed cleaning, but because I needed movement. Noise, control, something to do with my shaking hands. As I vacuumed, my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. I grabbed it, expecting Margaret. The number was unfamiliar. When I opened the voicemail, a stranger's voice spoke. "Ms. Hart, this is a courtesy call from the county clerk's office. We're following up regarding the guardianship inquiry submitted last week. Please contact us if you need assistance completing any documentation." My vision tunneled. Guardianship inquiry, submitted last week. Amber hadn't just begun the process, she was already in motion. I replayed Amber's final words at my door. "The longer you resist, the harder this will be for everyone." No, this wasn't about difficulty, this was about timing. Amber was running out of time financially, socially, strategically, and she was preparing to force her next move. I stared at the phone, pulse pounding. If I didn't act now, she'd get ahead of me again. I picked up the phone, I called Margaret, and I whispered the words that would start everything. "It's happening." The voicemail still echoed in my head long after I ended the call with the county clerk's office. Guardianship inquiry, submitted last week. Those words clung to me like frostbite, sharp and numbing. I paced my kitchen, my fingers trembling against the smooth grain of the table. The daylight outside dimmed as storm clouds rolled toward the fields, casting a strange gray glow over the house. A storm was coming outside, but the real storm was already here. By the time dusk settled, my chest felt tight. My heart beat a steady drum of panic. I told myself to breathe, to stay rational, to follow Margaret's instructions. But even reason has limits, and tonight fear kept pressing on them. I walked room to room, checking locks, checking windows, checking the things I didn't need to check. I needed movement. I needed noise. I needed anything to drown out the sound of Amber's voice telling me people thought I was slipping. By 9, the house was too quiet, too still. My phone buzzed twice, once from an unknown number I didn't dare answer, then again from Margaret. "Call me when you can. I have updates." I didn't call her back yet. I needed air. I needed grounding. So I slipped on my boots, grabbed my coat, and stepped out into the night. The wind whipped across the wide Wyoming fields, tugging at my coat, my hair, my nerves. The smell of impending rain mixed with the faint scent of sage that always reminded me of my father. Walking always helped clear my mind. Tonight it barely made a dent. I followed the dirt path behind the house, the one Dad and I used to take when he wanted to point out stars or talk about the structural design of bridges. The sky had begun to darken in earnest when I reached the fence line. My hand rested on the weathered wood, my breath misting in front of me. I stared out over the land, the acres my parents worked for, cared for, loved. Land Amber wanted to carve up and sell with her in-laws like it was nothing more than a bargaining chip. "This is mine," I whispered. "Mom and Dad left this to me, not to her." The wind answered with a low howl. I didn't hear the car until the headlights cut across the corner of the property, slicing through the darkness. My stomach flipped. No one visited me this late. No one drove down my road unless they lived there or had business with me. The car slowed at the end of my driveway. Even from the distance, I recognized the model. Amber's. My pulse kicked hard. I walked back quickly, boots crunching gravel, my breath speeding up as her driver's side door swung open. She stepped out, her silhouette framed by the headlights. No smile, no rehearsed warmth, just a chilly determination that made the hair on my arms rise. "Olivia!" she called, voice too bright for the dead quiet around us. "You weren't answering your phone." "I didn't hear it," I lied, stopping several feet from her. She walked closer, ignoring the space I tried to maintain. "I didn't like the way we left things earlier," she said. "We're sisters. We shouldn't fight." My jaw tightened. "This isn't fighting. This is you trying to take my home." Her eyes flashed. "Liv, don't be dramatic. I'm trying to help you. You want control. I want stability," she snapped before catching herself, softening her tone again. Yours. You've been making erratic decisions lately. What decisions? I shot back. Closing accounts, she said immediately. Canceling things without telling anyone, missing calls, locking yourself away out here. I froze. She knew about the closed account? The insurance changes? How? As if reading my confusion, she smirked slightly. People talk, Liv, and you're not as private as you think. My skin crawled. She took one more step toward me. Let me come inside, she said. You shouldn't be alone tonight. No, I said. We're not doing this. Her expression hardened. We're doing this because I'm worried about you. Liv, the county is going to follow up about your guardianship options. We need to be on the same page when they contact you. Guardianship options? I repeated. Amber, I'm not 90. I'm not incapacitated. She sighed dramatically. You don't have to be incapacitated. You just have to be unable to make decisions that protect your best interests. And lately, I cut her off. You filed the inquiry, didn't you? Amber blinked. For one fraction of a second, her mask slipped, just a flicker. Enough to confirm everything. I filed an inquiry, she said carefully, because I thought you needed guidance. That's all. Nothing formal. You contacted the county, I said steadily, about having me declared incompetent. I said nothing of the sort, Amber replied, widening her eyes in mock outrage. But Liv, if people start noticing you're not taking care of yourself, there is nothing wrong with me. That's what worries me, she repeated with faux sorrow. Lightning flashed in the distance. We stood in the wind, facing each other like two sides of a broken mirror. Amber with her perfect hair, expensive coat, flawless makeup, polished confidence. Me with dust on my boots, wind-blown hair, and a house full of my parents' memories behind me. She studied my face for a long moment. Then she took a breath, reached into her purse and pulled out a second document. A medical consent form. My stomach lurched. Just sign this, she said, soft and soothing. It lets me talk to your doctor, that's all, so I can help manage things. No, you're being paranoid. I'm being careful. Liv, she said sharply, if you don't let someone help you, you're going to end up making things very hard on yourself. And if I do sign, I asked, you get access to my records, full authority, full leverage. Stop talking like that, she snapped. It makes you sound unstable. There it was, the word she'd been dying to say. I felt something inside me settle, not panic, not fear, but clarity, sharp as glass. I want you to leave, I said. Amber stepped closer instead. You know what? I'll give you one more chance to be reasonable. She held the paper out between us. If you sign this tonight, we can avoid the rest. The rest. The guardianship petition. The legal process. The destruction she believed she could unleash. No, I said again. Amber's smile vanished entirely. She leaned in, voice low and venomous. Then you're forcing my hand. A shiver slid across my spine. I'm going to talk to Ethan, she said. To your doctor, to the county, to everyone who's concerned. And when the time comes, don't say I didn't warn you. I held my ground. Get off my property. Amber stared at me like she was looking at a stubborn child, rather than a grown woman with a career, a home, and a life built on my own terms. Oh, Liv, she sighed. Why do you always make things harder than they need to be? With that, she turned, walked to her car, and slammed the door hard enough to make me flinch. The tires spun gravel as she sped down the driveway into the night. The moment she disappeared, my knees weakened. I braced myself against the fence, breath shaking free from my chest in broken bursts. She'd escalated, fast, too fast. The guardianship inquiry had been submitted, the paperwork had begun. Her visit tonight had not been about reconciliation, it had been reconnaissance. She wanted to see whether I'd crack, whether fear would make me sign something without thinking, whether my resistance could be used as evidence of instability. And she was planning her next move already. I stumbled back into the house, locked every door, closed every curtain. My hands shook so hard I could barely type as I texted Margaret. Amber came. She brought more paperwork. She threatened guardianship. Seconds later, the phone rang. "Tell me everything," Margaret said. I did. Every word, every lie, every threat. When I finished, the silence on her end felt heavy. "This confirms it," she said. "She's moving aggressively." "What do I do now?" I whispered. "You prepare," Margaret repeated. "And Olivia, you're not going to like this next part." "What part?" "You have to let her think she's succeeding." "What?" "We need her to make a mistake, to show her hand, to say the wrong thing to the wrong person, to push too far. And she will, but only if she believes you're vulnerable." I closed my eyes, exhaustion flooding me. "So I have to pretend to be the thing she says I am?" "Momentarily," Margaret said. "Long enough for us to have what we need. You must not confront her again." "I didn't confront. You stood your ground," Margaret corrected. "And that's good. But from here forward, she can't know you're building a defense. You have to appear compliant, just enough." I swallowed. "I don't know if I can." "You can," she said, "because your mother knew you could, because she prepared for this, and because you're not alone." I sank onto the couch. "What happens next?" Margaret's voice steadied. "We wait for her next move. And Olivia?" "Yes?" "Whatever happens, do not sign anything." I nodded, though she couldn't see it. When the call ended, the house felt unbearably silent again. I walked to the window and watched the fields sway in the wind, remembering nights when this land felt safe, comforting, alive. Tonight, it felt like a battlefield. But I wasn't standing on it unarmed. Not anymore. Not with my mother's trust, Margaret's guidance, and the truth finally in my hands. Amber had made her move. Now it was my turn to prepare for mine. The next morning arrived with a sky the color of steel wool, flat and heavy, the kind of Wyoming morning that made everything feel colder than it really was. I didn't sleep much. Every time my eyes drifted shut, I saw Amber standing in my driveway, her face a mixture of control and contempt, her voice dripping with that sickly sweet concern she used like a knife. I showered, dressed, and forced myself to eat half a piece of toast. The rest I threw away after staring at it too long. My stomach felt hollow, not from hunger, but from dread. I kept replaying her words. "You're forcing my hand." That wasn't a threat. It was a promise. And promises were the one thing Amber always kept. At 9:30, Margaret called. "I'm heading your way," she said. "You shouldn't be alone today." "I'm fine," I tried. "No, you're not. I'm leaving now." Her tone brooked no argument. I hung up and exhaled through my teeth. I wasn't fine. She knew that. I knew that. By the time Margaret pulled into my driveway 40 minutes later, the wind had picked up again, rattling the old porch swing and sending brittle leaves skittering across the gravel. I stepped outside to meet her. She got out of her car holding a leather briefcase tucked under one arm. "You look pale," she said bluntly. "You look bossy," I replied. "Good, we're both observant." Despite everything, I almost smiled. Inside, she set her briefcase on the kitchen table and sat across from me. "Before we get into what I brought," she said, "you need to tell me every word Amber said last night. Don't hold anything back." So I told her. The driveway confrontation, the medical consent form, the insistence that people thought I was unstable, the thinly veiled threat that she'd escalate if I didn't comply. Margaret listened, expression sharp, focused. When I finished, she sat back. "She's frightened," Margaret said. I blinked. "Frightened? Amber?" "Yes," Margaret said. "She's terrified of losing access, of losing time, of losing whatever scheme her in-laws have been relying on. Desperation makes people accelerate their worst plans." "So she's dangerous." "More than she was 2 weeks ago," Margaret confirmed. "But desperation also makes people sloppy. She'll make mistakes, and we'll be waiting." I rubbed my temples. I feel like I'm living inside someone else's nightmare. No, Margaret said quietly. This is your reality, but you're not powerless in it. She opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick binder. This, she said, is everything we'll need to counter whatever Amber files. It includes your mother's trust structure, the investigative report, the activation triggers, everything. I stared at it. A fortress in the form of paperwork. Margaret continued, but we need to add one more thing. Your documentation. My documentation? She nodded. From today forward, you start a record. Every voicemail, every message, every visit, every time she says or does something that undermines you. I've already been writing things down. Good, but now it needs to be systematic, dated, times, places. If Amber wants to build a case that you're unstable, we'll build a case that she's predatory. I swallowed hard. What if she goes to the county before we're ready? She already did, Margaret said. But she won't stop there. Guardianship petitions require proof. They require psychologists, doctors, character witnesses, incidents, financial irregularities. She's been laying groundwork for years. Your mother knew that. But without a triggering event, guardianship arguments fall apart. Triggering event, I murmured. She'll try to create one, Margaret said simply. A moment she can point to that makes you look irrational or volatile or incapable. That's why you must remain calm, controlled, predictable, even if she tries to provoke you. That's what scares me, I admitted. Amber knows exactly how to push me. She won't succeed if you know the game she's playing. I stared at Margaret. Do you really think they're planning to take everything? My home, my land, my accounts? I think they already believe they've taken it, she replied. They just haven't told you yet. A chill went down my spine. Before she could say more, someone knocked on the front door. 3 sharp raps. My blood froze. Margaret's eyes met mine. Stay calm, she whispered. Let me handle this. I stood slowly, forcing my breath into steadiness, and opened the door. It wasn't Amber. It was Ethan. My entire body sagged with conflicted relief and dread. His posture was stiff, his face tight, hands shoved deep in his coat pockets. Hey, Liv, he said quietly. Can we talk? Margaret stepped beside me, her voice smooth. What's this regarding? Ethan blinked, surprised. It's personal. Personal, Margaret repeated, has legal implications today. You can say it in front of me. He hesitated, then nodded once. Amber told me you two had a disagreement. That's one word for it, I said. She said you were fragile, he continued awkwardly, and that she's worried you're making decisions that aren't safe or rational. Margaret muttered something under her breath that sounded like a lawyer's version of profanity. And she asked me to check on you, Ethan said. I swallowed a rush of anger. Check on me or evaluate me? His shoulders sagged. I don't know anymore. We stood there in the doorway, the air cold between us. Finally, Ethan lifted his eyes to mine. Liv, are you all right? Margaret's hand touched my elbow, a warning not to let emotion shape my answer. I'm fine, I said, but Amber isn't telling you the truth. He breathed out, a shaky, conflicted sound. I don't know what to believe. My parents think she's doing the right thing. Amber says your home is too much for you. She says you're overwhelmed, that you're acting erratically. Do you believe her? I asked. Ethan's eyes flickered. I think Amber believes she's right. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have right now. Margaret stepped forward slightly. Mr. Collins, we appreciate your concern, but Olivia is perfectly capable of managing herself and her affairs. In fact, she is under legal advisement at this time. His brows drew tight. Legal advisement? Yes, Margaret said, and anything further should be communicated through my office. Ethan hesitated again, torn between fear and his wife's version of the story. I just want peace, he murmured. Then you married the wrong sister, Margaret replied without hesitation. Ethan flinched. Before he could say more, Margaret closed the conversation with a smooth, professional finality. "We'll be in touch if necessary." Ethan nodded, stepped back, and walked toward his car without looking back. Dust swirled behind his tires as he drove away. When he disappeared down the road, Margaret closed the door and blew out a sharp breath. She's already using him. She always used him, I whispered. He just never saw it. Margaret sat again at the table. This changes our timeline. If she's using Ethan to establish third-party concern, she's preparing witnesses. We need more evidence before she moves to the courts. How do we get that? By documenting their pressure, she said, and possibly recording it. I felt heat rise in my cheeks. Recording? Yes, Margaret said. Legally, Wyoming is a one-party consent state. If you're part of the conversation, you can record it. We may need that. She opened her briefcase again and pulled out a small digital recorder. Put it in your pocket anytime she visits, she instructed. If she says anything about instability, guardianship, shared ownership, or pressure to sign, keep her talking. I stared at the small device. It felt like a lifeline. It also felt like betrayal. Margaret saw the conflict in my face. Olivia, listen. Amber is not your sister in this situation. She is an opposing party, and she is documenting you. I promise you that. My stomach twisted. Of course she was. She'll try again soon, Margaret continued. She didn't get what she wanted last night. She'll escalate. She'll invent urgency. She'll involve neighbors, more family members, maybe even clergy. The next step is cornering you emotionally. She wants you to falter. I took a deep breath. So I have to pretend I'm compliant. Not compliant, Margaret corrected. Just neutral, untouchable, a person who does not react. I pressed the recorder into my palm. Okay, I said softly. I can do that. We spent the next 2 hours going over scenarios. What to say, what not to say, what tone to use, how to deflect, how to redirect, how to protect myself without revealing the fortress being built around me. Margaret eventually left, promising to update me once she reviewed new filings. After she drove away, the house felt quieter than ever. Too quiet. I walked through each room, touching the familiar walls, the picture frames, the furniture my parents chose. I ended in my mother's study, her sanctuary. I sat in her old rocker and let the silence settle over me. "This is mine," I whispered again, "and you trusted me to protect it." Outside, the sun slipped behind the hills, painting the sky with streaks of violet and gold. I stood, walked to the window, and stared at the driveway. I told myself I was imagining it, but maybe I wasn't. Because for one split second, I thought I saw a car parked just beyond the bend in the road, watching, waiting, planning its next move. Amber wasn't done, and the war was only just beginning. The next 48 hours crawled by like they had weights tied to them. Every sound in the house felt louder, every shadow felt too still. Every buzz of my phone made my stomach tighten the way it does when you expect bad news and know you won't be wrong. Amber didn't return that night after her confrontation in the driveway. She didn't text, didn't call, didn't pretend to check in. And somehow her silence felt more dangerous than her presence. Silence meant planning. Silence meant escalation. By Saturday morning, my nerves were stretched thin. I tried keeping busy, organizing old project files from work, sweeping the porch, restocking the pantry. But my thoughts kept circling back to one question. What was Amber doing now? What was she preparing? The guardianship inquiry wasn't a warning, it was the beginning, and beginnings always led somewhere. At noon, my phone buzzed again. A message from an unknown number. "Ms. Hart, this is a courtesy call to inform you your primary care physician submitted a note regarding your annual wellness check. Please contact the office if you wish to review your health documentation." I froze. My last wellness check had been routine, perfect. I had no ongoing medical issues, no prescriptions, nothing Amber could use, unless someone asked the office to send something, or asked a leading question or implied concern. I sat down hard at the kitchen table, my throat tightening. That wasn't coincidence. That was a probe. A test to see if the doctor could be used to build a narrative. I grabbed the recorder Margaret had given me and slipped it into my pocket, pulse thudding. If Amber showed up today, I needed proof. If she pushed again, I needed evidence. I wasn't going into this blind anymore. I was still sitting at the table when tires crunched across the gravel. I felt the sound before I heard it. I stood slowly, forcing my breath into something steady, rehearsing Margaret's instructions. Stay calm. Show nothing. Record everything. When I looked through the window, my breath stilled. It wasn't Amber's car. It was her in-laws. Thomas and Lorraine Collins stepped out of their sleek silver SUV with the confidence of people who thought they owned everything they stood near. Thomas was in a navy jacket despite the warm weather, his expression drawn but stern. Lorraine wore a fitted cream coat, sunglasses perched atop her perfect blonde hair, her posture sharp as a blade. My stomach sank. If the in-laws were here, this wasn't a visit. This was an operation. I opened the door before they could knock. Thomas, Lorraine. They gave me matching polite smiles that didn't reach their eyes. Olivia, Lorraine said smoothly. Good afternoon, dear. Dear, I almost laughed. Lorraine didn't call anyone dear unless she wanted something from them. Is there something you need? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Well, Thomas said, that depends on how willing you are to make things easy. I stepped aside just enough to make it clear they weren't welcome inside. We can talk here. Lorraine looked mildly annoyed by the boundary, but covered it with a smile. We won't keep you long. We simply want to clarify a few things Amber mentioned. Of course, Amber had mentioned things. Amber had probably delivered a full monologue about my supposed instability. I'm listening, I said. Thomas exchanged a glance with his wife, then spoke carefully. Amber is concerned about your behavior lately. Extremely concerned. My behavior? I repeated. Lorraine nodded sympathetically. Yes, dear. She told us you've been struggling. I pressed the recorder in my pocket, letting the silence stretch just long enough. What kind of struggles? I asked. Lorraine clucked her tongue. Emotional distress, forgetfulness, mood swings, isolation. She said you've been making questionable decisions recently. Closing accounts without explanation, Thomas added. That sort of thing. I blinked slowly. My financial choices are not Amber's business. They are, Lorraine said lightly, if they indicate mental decline. There it was, the phrase they'd been waiting to slide into the conversation. Mental decline, I repeated softly. Yes, Lorraine said. And if that's the case, we all need to take action before things get worse. Action, I said. What kind of action? Thomas cleared his throat. Guardianship is a heavy word, Olivia. But sometimes family needs to step in for someone's protection. I stared at them. Family? Yes, Lorraine said smoothly. We're all family now. I almost laughed. Instead, I forced my jaw to relax. Margaret's words echoed, stay calm, stay empty, stay untouchable. Why are you here, Lorraine? I asked. We'd like you to sign a preliminary agreement, she said, pulling a narrow folder from her purse. Nothing binding, just acknowledgement that you're open to financial oversight. My heart thudded against my ribs. Financial oversight. Yes, Thomas said. Amber fears you're not managing things well. This will allow us to help before the situation becomes problematic. Problematic, I echoed. Lorraine sighed, putting on her glassy, pitying expression, the same one she used on waitstaff when she wanted free wine. Liv, dear, the sooner you admit you're overwhelmed, the sooner we can step in. And take control, I said. To support you, Lorraine corrected sharply. No, I said. The couple blinked. No, Lorraine repeated. I'm not signing anything. A chill passed over Thomas's face, the polite veneer slipping. That, he said, is unwise. It's my decision, I replied. He stepped closer, invading my space the way Amber always did. You are making things harder than they need to be. Thomas, Lorraine murmured, touching his arm. Let me. She turned back to me with a somber expression. Olivia, I'm going to be frank. The county already has concerns. If you refuse help, you reinforce the narrative that you're unable to make decisions. My stomach clenched. Reinforce the narrative. The same phrase Margaret had warned me about. Declining supportive oversight, Lorraine continued, looks like instability, and you don't want that. I swallowed but kept my voice steady. I'm perfectly capable of managing my own life. That's what Amber said you'd say, Thomas murmured. Then she knows me very well. No, Lorraine corrected, her eyes glinting. She knows how denial works. My chest tightened. They were circling me like predators who'd cornered their prey. Let's cut to the point, Thomas said, losing patience. Sign the preliminary agreement. Let us help manage your estate. Otherwise, he stopped. Otherwise what? I asked. Lorraine leaned in slightly. Otherwise the county will handle it. And when they do, you won't get to choose who your guardian is. My pulse hammered, dark, calculated, practiced. But instead of fear, something else flared in me, something steadier. This conversation is over, I said. Lorraine's face tightened. You're being childish. No, I said, I'm being rational and you're trespassing. Thomas's jaw flexed. Olivia, you don't want to do this. Yes, I said, I do. I stepped backward into the doorway. Leave. Now. Lorraine's eyes narrowed. Thomas muttered a curse under his breath. This isn't over, Lorraine said softly. I know, I replied. They walked back to their SUV stiffly, anger radiating off them like heat. Dust billowed behind their tires as they sped away. The moment they were gone, my breath left me in a shaky rush. My knees gave out and I slid to the floor, heart pounding like it wanted out of my chest. Not just Amber, her in-laws too. Working as a unit, a coordinated strike, and they'd escalated faster than Margaret predicted. I scrambled to my phone and called her. She answered on the first ring. What happened? She asked. They came, I gasped, voice shaking. Her in-laws. They brought paperwork. They said guardianship would be taken out of my hands if I didn't agree to oversight. Silence. Then, good, Margaret said. I blinked. Good? Yes, she said, because now we have evidence of coercion from multiple parties. We needed them to overreach, and they have. I exhaled a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Margaret continued, they revealed their timeline. That gives us an advantage. What do we do now? We prepare for the petition, she said. It's coming soon, possibly days, and when it does, we'll be ready. You've just given us exactly what we needed. I slumped against the doorframe, exhausted. This is really happening, isn't it? Yes, Margaret said softly. But Olivia, you're not losing. You're just finally seeing the truth. I closed my eyes. The truth was terrifying, but knowing it, that was power. And I wasn't going to let my sister or anyone else take anything more from me. The guardianship petition arrived on a Tuesday morning, wrapped in a manila envelope stamped with the seal of the county courthouse. I found it on my porch, half buried in wind-blown leaves. For a long moment I just stared at it. My breath caught somewhere between my ribs and my throat. Because even though Margaret warned me it was coming, nothing prepares you for the moment your own sister asks the government to take your life out of your hands. The envelope felt heavier than paper when I picked it up, heavier than anything I'd held in years. I carried it into the kitchen, set it gently on the table, and just looked at it as if it might speak on its own. My hands trembled as I opened it. The first page was a formal notice. The second was a statement of concerns. The third listed the petitioner, Amber Collins. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't crumble. I just felt something inside me settle. Quiet, cold, certain. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and called Margaret. She answered before the first ring finished. "It came," I whispered. "Read nothing else," she said immediately. "Take pictures of the envelope, every page. Send them to me." I did. My fingers shook, but I managed to get everything scanned and to her email. Margaret was silent for a long moment as she read. Then she exhaled sharply. She overplayed her hand. "She's trying to take everything," I murmured. "I know," Margaret said, "but what she submitted is sloppy, rushed, and full of inconsistencies. That helps us. It also means she's desperate." "Yes," Margaret said quietly, "and desperation makes people reckless. But Olivia, it also makes them dangerous." I swallowed hard. "What's our next move?" "You do nothing," Margaret replied. "I do everything. This petition triggers your mother's trust mechanisms. I'll handle the filings. And you—" "Yes?" "Record everything from now on. Every interaction, every phone call, every conversation." Her tone softened. "I know it feels invasive, but you need to protect yourself." "I will," I said. "I promise." "Good. I'll be at your house in 2 hours." When the call ended, I sat at the table with the petition in front of me. I read the first paragraph without meaning to. That was my mistake. The lies were so precise they could only have been rehearsed. Olivia Hart has demonstrated increasing emotional instability, impaired judgment, and difficulty managing personal and financial affairs. I laughed, a short, sharp, humorless sound. Then I kept reading. Repeated incidents of erratic behavior. Episodes of confusion. Volatile interactions. My jaw locked. But the sentence that made my stomach drop was this one. Family members have expressed long-standing concerns about her inability to care for herself. Family members, plural, not just Amber, her in-laws. Maybe even neighbors she'd manipulated. Maybe Ethan. My chest tightened. I pushed the papers away and stood abruptly. I needed air. I needed to move. I needed something solid to hold onto because the ground under me felt like it was cracking. I threw on my coat and stepped outside into the cold wind. The sky overhead was a wash of gray, heavy enough to feel like a weight pressing between my shoulders. I walked across the field, boots sinking into the damp earth, heading toward the old barn my father built when I was 8. The air smelled of hay and dust and winter. It felt like him. I leaned against the wooden wall and closed my eyes. For a moment I pretended the world was simple again. That family meant safety, that people meant love, that betrayal was a thing that happened in movies and not in your own living room. But pretending didn't last long. When I opened my eyes, Amber's SUV was pulling up my driveway. Not again, not today, not now. My heart hammered as I strode back across the field. The closer I got, the clearer I saw her, standing beside her car, arms folded, expression tight with righteous purpose. She wasn't alone. Ethan was with her. My stomach dropped. "Liv!" Amber called too brightly. "We need to talk." I slowed, forcing myself to reach for the recorder in my coat pocket. I clicked it on without looking at it. "What do you want?" I asked calmly. Amber held up a copy of the petition. Hers was crisp, untouched by my shaking hands. "I assume you've seen this?" "I have." "Good," she said, nodding as if this was all unfolding according to her plan. "Then we're on the same page." "What page is that?" "That you need help," she said, voice soft with condescension. "And you're refusing to accept it." "I'm refusing to accept your lies." Amber stiffened. "Liv, it's for your own good." I almost laughed. "You filed a petition to take control of my estate." "It's called a protective guardianship," Amber corrected. "It's not about control, it's about safety." "Whose safety?" I asked. She hesitated. "Yours, obviously." I blinked slowly. "You want my house, you want my assets, you want my land. That's what this is." "That's unfair," she snapped. "I'm thinking long term. You can't manage everything alone forever." "I've managed just fine." "Not according to these," she said. shaking a stack of papers. I felt my pulse kick hard. "What are those?" "Statements," she said simply, "from people who've noticed—" She let the sentence hang, waiting for me to fill it with fear. "Notice what?" I asked, voice steady. Amber inhaled slowly. "That you're slipping." I tilted my head. "Who are these people?" Amber hesitated just a hair too long. "My neighbors?" I asked. "No." "Your husband?" She glanced at Ethan, and right there, everything in me went still. Ethan didn't look confident. He didn't look convinced. He looked sick, pale, caught in a lie he didn't fully agree to. "Ethan," I said quietly, "did you submit something?" His eyes flicked down. Amber stepped between us like a wall. "He didn't do anything you should be upset about." That was answer enough. My heart cracked, not in anger but in something more like grief. Ethan wasn't malicious. He was manipulated. He was drowning under Amber's pressure, her narrative, her certainty. "Liv," he said softly, I told them you seemed stressed. That's all." "Stressed," I repeated softly. Amber touched his arm sharply. "You don't owe her an explanation." I forced myself to inhale, then exhale slowly. "Amber, leave." "No," she said. "Not until you listen." I did listen. And I'm telling you, leave." Amber's face hardened. "You're making a mistake, Liv. There's nothing to discuss. You can't ignore this." "I'm not ignoring it," I said quietly. "I'm documenting it." Amber froze. "You're what?" I met her gaze head on. "Everything you're doing, everything you're saying, I'm keeping record." "Why?" she asked sharply. "Because when this reaches court," I said, "the judge will want to know who is unstable and who is manipulating." Silence. A still, cold, dangerous silence. Amber stepped closer, her jaw clenched so tightly I could see the tendons strain in her neck. "You think you can fight this?" "Yes." "You can't," she hissed. "I've already started the process." "So have I." Amber's face turned almost ashen. Ethan stepped between us. "Amber," he said quietly, "maybe we should go." She ignored him, eyes locked on me with a kind of hatred I had never seen from her before. "You're going to regret this," she whispered. I took a step back, keeping my voice even. "That's what you always say when someone tells you no." Amber's eyes flashed with fury. Without another word, she spun on her heel, marched back to her SUV, and slammed the door. Ethan hesitated for one small, broken moment, almost like he wanted to say something, but Amber yelled his name, sharp as a whip crack. He flinched and followed her. The SUV sped away, gravel spraying behind its tires. The moment they disappeared, my knees buckled. I caught myself against the porch railing, breathing hard. I pulled the recorder from my pocket and whispered, "Did you hear that, Mom? She's doing it. But so am I." Inside the house, the petition still sat on the kitchen table. But something in me had changed. Fear was still there, cold and heavy. But beneath it was something new. Resolve. Amber wasn't the only one who could escalate. And she had no idea how much protection my mother had built around me. When Margaret arrived an hour later, she listened to the entire recording twice, her jaw tightening with each word Amber spoke. When it ended, Margaret closed her eyes and exhaled slowly. "This," she said finally, "is exactly what we needed." "What happens now?" I asked. Margaret's voice steadied into steel. "Now, Olivia, we prepare our counterattack." The days after Amber filed the guardianship petition felt like living inside a tightening wire. Everything hummed with tension. The phone ringing, the mail arriving, even the wind hitting the windows. I kept expecting another blow, another knock, another ambush. But Amber went silent again, and her silence had become its own kind of warning. Something was coming, something big, and I needed to be ready for it. Margaret visited me every day that week, sometimes just for an hour, sometimes for an entire afternoon. We sat at my kitchen table with stacks of documents between us, building what she called a defensive spine, a structure so strong that Amber and her in-laws would break against it before it ever bent. On Thursday morning, Margaret arrived with a heavy binder and a small hard drive. "This," she said, setting them both down, "is from your mother." My breath caught. "There's more?" "Much more," Margaret said. "She prepared levels of protection she didn't want you to see unless you absolutely needed them. And now, Olivia, you need them." I sat down slowly, my hands trembling slightly as I opened the binder. Inside were handwritten notes, attorney correspondence, and a structured timeline, my mother's. She had mapped out every concern she had about Amber from the year after my father died. Little things at first. Comments Amber made about my job being too stressful. A time she told my aunt I was forgetful. A moment at Christmas when she tried to take over my mortgage conversations as a favor. Mom had noticed everything, every seed Amber planted, every shift in tone, every quiet attempt to suggest I needed help. "She knew," I whispered. "She knew all this time." Margaret touched my hand. "Your mother was perceptive. She saw behaviors long before you had reason to interpret them as threats." I's throat tightened. "She tried to warn me. I didn't want to see it." "That's normal," Margaret said gently. "You trusted your sister. You wanted family. You didn't want a war." But war had come anyway. I turned the page to find printed photos taken by the investigator my mother hired. One showed Amber at brunch with her in-laws, her face animated in conversation. Another showed Lorraine entering a title agency office. And another showed Thomas speaking to a man my mother had identified as a banker known for handling distressed assets. My chest tightened painfully. They had planned this long before Amber threw the $900 bill at me. "Why didn't she tell me sooner?" I asked softly. Margaret's expression softened. "Because she hoped it wouldn't come to this. She hoped Amber would stop. She hoped you'd never need to see your own sister as an enemy." I blinked hard, fighting rising emotion. "And now she's given me a fortress." Margaret nodded. "She gave you armor before you knew you'd need it." I closed the binder and exhaled slowly. "So, what do we do now?" Margaret tapped the hard drive. "Now we look at the trigger files." "What are those?" "Instructions your mother left," Margaret said. "Legal provisions that activate once a guardianship attempt is made. The trust is now in a defensive state. That means Amber can't touch a penny, not legally, not through fraud, not through court." A flicker of hope sparked through my fear. "So she can't win?" "She can try," Margaret said, voice steady. "But we're going to dismantle her entire case piece by piece before it gets in front of a judge." I nodded, more firmly this time. But before Margaret could continue, a car turned into my driveway. I recognized the headlights instantly, and every muscle in my body tightened. Ethan. He parked, shut off the engine, and sat there for several seconds before getting out, as if he were trying to gather courage. I felt my breath grow shallow. After his silence the day before, I wasn't sure what version of him I would find at my door. Margaret placed a hand on my arm. "Start your recorder." I clicked it on. Ethan approached the porch with his hands jammed into his coat pockets, his face pale, strained. He stopped at the bottom of the steps. "Liv," he said, voice fatigued. "We need to talk." Margaret stepped into the doorway beside me. "This conversation will be documented, Mr. Collins." He nodded, surprisingly not resisting. "That's fine. I need to tell you something." I folded my arms and kept my expression neutral. Margaret had trained me well. "What is it?" I asked. Ethan took a slow breath. "Amber told me not to come here. She said I'd make things worse." He looked up, pain flickering in his eyes. "But I can't keep pretending I don't see what's going on." I exchanged a quick glance with Margaret, but kept silent. "Amber's family is collapsing financially," he continued. "Thomas's business is deeper in debt than I realized. Lorraine's credit lines are maxed out, and their house," he swallowed, "it's in pre-foreclosure, Liv." Everything inside me went cold. "They've been hiding it from everyone," Ethan said. Even from me. I only found out because a notice came in the mail. And when I confronted Amber about it, she didn't deny it. Lorraine's visit, Thomas's cold stare, the rushed guardianship filing. It all clicked together with brutal clarity. "They want my house," I whispered. Ethan nodded miserably. "They need it." Margaret's voice was calm but razor sharp. "And they think they're owed it." Ethan squeezed the back of his neck. "Amber kept saying you have too much for one person and that families should share wealth. That you weren't using your assets efficiently. That if you lost the house, it'd be better for everyone." My stomach twisted sickeningly. Amber believed that. She genuinely believed taking everything from me was justified, because she needed it. "That house isn't just property," I said quietly. "It's my parents' legacy." Ethan blinked hard. "Liv, I know. And you need to know something else too. Amber's parents told her that once guardianship is granted, everything you own can be liquidated to pay for your care. They've already discussed listing the house." I staggered back a step, fury rising so quickly I tasted metal. Margaret caught my arm. "Olivia, breathe." Ethan looked between us. "I'm not defending them. I'm telling you because you deserve to know. You deserve the truth." "What about the petition?" I asked. "Did you sign anything?" "No," he said quickly. "They wanted me to write a statement, but I refused. I told Amber I wouldn't lie." "Then why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked, my voice breaking in spite of myself. He looked down, guilt heavy in every line of his posture. "Because I was afraid of her reaction. She's not the person I thought I married." Margaret studied him for a long moment. "Mr. Collins, are you willing to testify to any of this?" He hesitated. I don't know yet. "Are you willing to stop helping her harm Olivia?" He nodded fiercely. "Yes, I've already done that." Margaret's posture softened by an inch. "Then you've taken the first step." Ethan's shoulders sagged with exhaustion. "Liv, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I should have protected you." I didn't say anything. I didn't trust my voice. After a long moment, Ethan stepped back. "I shouldn't stay here. If Amber finds out, she'll twist it somehow. But if you need anything at all, call me." He turned and walked slowly to his car. Before he got in, he looked back at me one more time. Something broken, something remorseful in his eyes, then drove away. When the gravel settled, Margaret spoke first. "This," she said, pointing to the recorder in my hand, "is proof." "One part of it," I murmured. She nodded, but Ethan confirmed the central motive: financial desperation. That will undermine her petition immediately. I inhaled shakily. I didn't realize how close they were to losing everything. "That's why they accelerated," Margaret said. "Their house, their debt, their reputation, they're cornered animals. Cornered animals bite." I looked down at the petition on my table and felt a strange surge of strength. "So do people who've been underestimated," I said. Margaret's lips curved into the faintest smile. "Your mother would have liked that." She sat down again and pulled out more documents. "There's another part we need to address today." "What is it?" "You're going to receive a welfare check." I blinked. "What?" "Amber will call the sheriff's office," Margaret said. "Soon, likely claiming you're a danger to yourself or unable to care for yourself. It's a predictable step in guardianship manipulation." My stomach dropped. "She'd do that?" "She already has," Margaret said. "The sheriff's deputy called my office this morning asking about you." Ice shot through me. Why didn't he call me? "He will," Margaret said, "but I told him I'd be here with you." "Oh my God," I whispered. "She's unhinged." "She's desperate," Margaret corrected. "And now that the petition is filed, she needs evidence of instability. She'll try to create that evidence." "When?" "Today," Margaret said simply. "Maybe tonight." I ran a hand through my hair, exhaling hard. "So what do I do?" "Be calm, be polite, answer questions. Show the deputy your home, your fridge, your medication, nothing out of the ordinary. It'll take 5 minutes and then it's over. And Amber loses another piece of her case, I whispered. Yes, Margaret said. Exactly. The rest of the afternoon passed in tense preparation. Margaret coached me on what to expect, what to say, what not to say. By 6 o'clock, she heated soup for us on the stove while I paced the kitchen. At 7:23, her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen and nodded. They're coming! My pulse pounded in my ears. At 7:30 sharp, a sheriff's cruiser rolled into the driveway. Margaret placed a steady hand on my back. This is the last time you let Amber define you. After tonight, she loses her narrative. I nodded, drawing in one deep breath. Then I opened the door. Deputy Harmon stood on the porch, hat in hand, expression polite but serious. Evening, he said. We received a call regarding a welfare concern. I met his eyes steadily. Yes, I said. Come in. Margaret stood behind me like a pillar, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt strong. Daniel showed up at my house just after dawn, the sky still streaked with soft gray light, his car rolling to a stop behind Margaret's sedan. I had barely slept, but something in the way he stepped out, shoulders squared, a folder tucked firmly under his arm, told me today was going to be different. Today, he'd chosen a side. He walked up the porch steps without hesitation. When I opened the door, he didn't offer excuses or apologies. He simply said, "We need to talk, all of it, no more hiding." Margaret joined us in the kitchen, her expression unreadable but attentive. Daniel set the folder down between us, his hands bracing the edges like he feared it might float away. I didn't know where to start, he said, voice tight. So I just gathered everything. He unzipped the folder and pulled out papers, bank statements, printouts of emails, screenshots, even what looked like transcripts. My breath caught. He had been documenting everything. For months. Daniel, I whispered, how long have you known? He exhaled, eyes trained on the scattered documents. Longer than I want to admit. He took the seat across from me, the early morning sunlight catching the exhaustion under his eyes. Margaret folded her hands calmly, letting him speak. It started with little things, he said. I'd see Amber texting her parents late at night. She'd tell me it was about the kids or planning family trips, but it always felt wrong. Then she started saving files under my work folders, legal forms, property documents, emails with subject lines like timeline. I didn't look at them at first because I didn't want to know. His fingers tightened on the folder. Then one day I overheard her on the phone with her mother. She was talking about you, about your house, about accelerating the plan. A cold shiver slid down my spine. Daniel swallowed hard. I confronted her. She laughed, said I was being dramatic, said I was paranoid like... His voice faltered. Like you. I clenched my jaw, absorbing that quietly. That night, he continued, I started checking the documents she'd been hiding. I found drafts of petitions, notes about guardianship rules, lists of your assets. Some of the phrases... He took out one page and slid it toward me. She wrote, if we time the welfare checks correctly, the incompetency claim sticks easier. The room felt colder suddenly. Margaret leaned in, her voice calm but razor sharp. Did she discuss filing the petition with you? Yes, he said. She wanted me to sign a statement about Olivia being irresponsible with money. She said it would streamline the process. I refused. She didn't talk to me for days. I felt my chest tighten, not with anger but with grief for what he had been trapped inside. I didn't want to believe she could hurt you, he said, or manipulate me like that. So I started recording conversations, not because I was ready to betray her, but because I needed proof I wasn't imagining everything. He took out a small USB drive and placed it next to the folder. This has everything. Margaret's controlled inhale told me she recognized its value immediately. Daniel rubbed his forehead with shaking fingers. You don't know how many nights I lay awake thinking, if I'm wrong, I'm destroying my marriage, and if I'm right, she's destroying my sister. I didn't want either to be true. I reached across the table and touched his arm gently. You were afraid. His eyes glistened. I was ashamed. I should have protected you sooner. Margaret finally spoke. Daniel, what you did was dangerous. If Amber had suspected you were collecting evidence, she might have escalated. Fast. I know, he said. So I played along. I let her think she still had control. I pretended to support the guardianship long enough for her to stop paying attention to me. My breath caught. You were working from inside. Yes, he whispered. Every chance I could. He took out another document, another forged signature. My forged signature. My heart pounded. She forged several versions, Daniel said, voice tight. I compared them to your actual signature from birthday cards and scanned documents. At least 2 were used on forms she tried to file through an expedited channel. They got rejected because she forgot a witness signature. His eyes met mine, pained. They would have gone through eventually. A tremor ran through me. Margaret set the document aside, her jaw tightening. This is enough to legally bury her petition. Daniel wasn't finished. He pulled out a stack of printed emails next. Emails between Amber and her parents. She sent them updates after every visit with you, he said softly. After every phone call, after the dinner, after the welfare check failed. They had a running timeline. He pushed one email forward. Bolded text jumped off the page. Once the incompetency filing is approved, we liquidate the property ASAP. Daniel will manage the transition. My stomach twisted painfully. She was planning to use me, Daniel whispered, to oversee selling the house, to clean it out, like I was just another tool. Margaret's voice was low and steady. You understand this proves motive, planning, coordination, and financial exploitation. Daniel glanced between us. There's more. He opened a notebook, his notebook. Handwritten entries filled every page. I documented everything, he said. My conversations with her, her mood swings, her instructions, her threats, the way she rehearsed what she wanted me to say to the judge. He looked up, a flicker of shame crossing his face. I didn't know it then, but I was building a timeline, a record. Margaret's eyes warmed slightly. Your meticulousness may have just saved your sister's life as she knows it. He swallowed. I hope so. I forced myself to breathe slowly, grounding myself before speaking. Daniel, will you testify? Silence stretched. Then he nodded once, sharply. Yes, against Amber, against her parents, against any of them, whatever you need. Emotion surged through me so fast I had to steady myself. Margaret stood, walked around the table, and placed her hand on Daniel's shoulder. Your testimony changes the entire landscape. Daniel let out a shaky breath. I'm done covering for them. I'm done pretending I don't see what's happening. I'm choosing you, Liv. I'm choosing the truth. Tears prickled at the back of my eyes. Before I could speak, Daniel continued, And there's one more thing. I should have told you earlier, but... He hesitated. I sent copies of everything to the State Elder Protection Division and to a federal hotline, anonymous, but they have the files. Margaret straightened. That was a risky move. I know, he said, but nobody else should go through what Liv is going through, or what Mom feared. Something inside me broke, not in pain, but in relief, in pride, in the realization that my brother had finally stepped out of the shadows Amber kept him trapped in. We spent the next hour reviewing the evidence, solid, damning, unmistakable. Daniel answered every question, clarified every detail, provided every timestamp, every context, every place and date. He didn't flinch once. Finally, Margaret closed her folder. We have enough, she said. More than enough. We're ready. Daniel looked at me, eyes red but firm. Liv, I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. I shook my head and pulled him into a tight embrace. You're here now. That's what matters. He hugged me back with a desperation that felt like years of guilt draining out at last. When he stepped away, his voice was steadier. What happens next? Margaret answered. Now we prepare the confrontation. When they step into your house again, when they try to push you, Olivia will have every piece of evidence, every file, every recording ready. And so will I. Daniel nodded. I'll be there. Your testimony, Margaret continued, is the weapon they won't see coming. He sat up straighter. Tell me where to be and what to say. Margaret's expression softened. Just tell the truth, Daniel. Everything else will follow. He turned to me again, and the determination on his face was unmistakable. They tried to take everything from you, but they forgot something. What? I asked. He smiled sadly. That I'm still your brother. As the morning sunlight filled the kitchen, warming the oak cabinets and scattering across the documents that would unravel Amber's entire scheme, I realized something profound. Amber thought she could isolate me, break me, replace my truth with her narrative. But she forgot one thing too. The people you underestimate the hardest are the ones who stand strongest when everything collapses. And now, finally, my brother was standing with me. Amber arrived in the late afternoon, exactly the way Margaret predicted she would, without calling, without warning, with the same brittle confidence of someone who believed she had already won. I saw her SUV coming down my gravel driveway from the kitchen window, dust kicking up behind her tires, sunlight flashing across the metallic paint like a blade. She didn't come alone. Her husband, Tyler, stepped out of the passenger seat with a stiff jaw and narrowed eyes, and behind them, incredibly, Amber's parents followed in a second car, dressed as if heading to a church service rather than an ambush. I didn't open the door until the fourth aggressive knock. When I did, Amber was standing front and center, lips stretched into a smile so tight it was nearly a snarl. "Liv," she said sweetly, "we need to finalize some things before the hearing." I didn't speak. I simply stepped back and let them enter, the way Margaret instructed. Let them feel comfortable. Let them think I was folding. Let them hang themselves. The Hargroves drifted into my living room as though they owned it. Marjorie running her polished fingers across the antique banister. Gerald inspecting the framed architectural drawings I'd kept from old projects. Tyler heading straight to the couch like a man reclaiming property. Amber walked right up to me. "We should make this easy," she said, voice soft but dripping with condescension. "All you need to do is sign a joint ownership agreement, and we'll cancel the petition." I let a beat of silence pass. "You're canceling nothing," I said calmly. Amber's eyes glinted. "You think you can fight us?" "This isn't a fight," I replied. "This is an exposure." She blinked, confused for a fraction of a second. "Exposure of what?" Margaret stepped out from the hallway. The effect on Amber was instantaneous. She froze, eyes widening, throat working, posture involuntarily straightening like she'd been caught shoplifting under a security camera. "Hello, Amber," Margaret said, voice smooth as polished steel. "Thank you for coming." Tyler jumped to his feet. "What is she doing here?" "I invited her," I said simply. Marjorie gave a brittle smile. "We won't need lawyers today. This is a family matter." "No," Margaret said, setting her briefcase on my coffee table. "This is a legal matter, and you pushed it there." Gerald scoffed. "We're not intimidated by an attorney." "You should be," Margaret replied. Amber recovered enough to scoff. "Liv, really? You hired her? You're wasting your money. Once the court hears the petition, the incompetency order proceeds." Margaret held up her hand. "Let's stop pretending you're here out of concern for Olivia's well-being. You want her house, her land, her accounts, and you forged documents and manipulated witnesses to get them." Silence slammed through the room so abruptly it was like the air was punched out of all of them at once. Then, "That's a lie," Amber snapped. Margaret popped open her briefcase latch. Click, click. She withdrew the first folder. The investigator's report my mother had commissioned years ago. She laid it on the coffee table with deliberate slowness. Then she added a second, and a third. This, Margaret said, tapping the top folder, contains 5 years of documented concerns recorded by Olivia's mother before her passing. Names, timelines, patterns, matches to your behavior. Marjorie's lips parted in horror. Your mother never even liked us. Of course she made things up. Oh, she did far more than write notes, Margaret said. She hired a private investigator who traced connections, including your financial collapse in Colorado, your failed business ventures, and multiple suspicious relationships with vulnerable elderly neighbors. Your patterns are nearly identical. Amber's face drained of color. Tyler stammered. This doesn't mean anything. These are coincidences. No, Margaret said sharply. These are precedents. She pulled out the next file. This is the Guardian petition you filed, the one claiming Olivia showed consistent cognitive decline and erratic behavior. Gerald puffed up, indignant. Because she has. She's hysterical and unstable. Funny, Margaret said coolly, since her performance evaluations from her engineering firm describe her as exceptional, meticulous, and the most stable project lead on staff. I watched the shock ripple through the Hargroves like a wave. You lied, Margaret continued. You staged incidents. You coordinated false statements, and you recorded nothing to substantiate your claims. But Olivia and I? She reached for the final folder. We recorded everything. Amber's mouth fell open. Everything? What? Margaret didn't answer. She pressed play on the small speaker she'd placed on the table. Amber's own voice filled the room. Once the incompetency filing goes through, we liquidate her property. Tyler, you'll help oversee. Dad will claim she's been slipping for years. Mom will submit her statement. It'll pass. She's too isolated to contest anything. Marjorie gasped. Gerald swore under his breath. Tyler stepped back like he'd been punched. Amber went paper white. You recorded me? She whispered, choking on the words. No, I said quietly. Daniel did. The room split open. Marjorie whirled toward the hallway just as Daniel stepped inside. His presence changed the entire atmosphere, because unlike the Hargroves, he didn't look nervous. He looked resolute. You, Amber hissed. You traitor! Daniel didn't flinch. I told them everything. All of it? Margaret asked. He nodded and set the folder he'd brought onto the table beside Margaret's files. Witness statements, timeline notes, signed documents showing coercion, forged signatures, screenshots of Amber's emails, recordings of her speaking to the guardianship lawyer. Evidence so complete and airtight the Hargroves didn't even pretend to deny it anymore. Gerald swung toward his daughter. Amber, what did you do? Amber collapsed onto the sofa, staring at nothing, her entire face slack. I didn't think... That, Margaret said sharply, is the problem. You didn't think anyone would stop you. Silence settled thick as storm clouds before a downpour. I could practically feel the air pressing down. Finally, Margaret gathered the documents into a neat stack. This petition, she said, tone steady, is now legally null. It will be dismissed with prejudice. That means you cannot refile against Olivia, ever. She wasn't done. All of this documentation, she gestured to the mountain of evidence, has already been submitted to the county prosecutor's office and the Elder Protection Division. Amber jerked upright. You can't. I can, Margaret said, and I have. Marjorie surged forward. You can't ruin our family over a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding, Margaret repeated, her voice rising for the first time. You tried to steal her home, her assets, her life. Tyler stepped in front of Marjorie, hands raised. We can fix this. We just need to calm down. Daniel shook his head. No, Tyler. You can't fix this. You chose the wrong side. Amber's breathing hitched. Daniel, please. He didn't look at her. He looked at me. I'm sorry, he said softly. He meant it. And for a moment, tears pricked behind my eyes. Because after everything, he was here, standing with me, fighting for us. Amber seemed to break then. She twisted toward him, desperation etched in every line of her body. "You're my husband," she whispered. "You're supposed to support me." Daniel barely blinked. "I'm supposed to support what's right, and you stopped being right a long time ago." The silence that followed felt like the final crack before a structure collapses. Margaret closed her briefcase. "This meeting," she said, "is over. Leave the property immediately. Any further contact with Olivia will be handled through legal channels." Gerald sputtered. "You can't throw us out." "I can," I said softly, "and I am." Amber stood slowly, her expression hollow and trembling. "This isn't over," she whispered. "Yes," I replied, turning toward the door. "It is." I opened it wide, letting in the late afternoon light that felt warmer than anything in the room. "Goodbye, Amber." She walked out first. Her parents followed. Tyler lingered a moment, looking like he wanted to say something, but chose not to. And then they were gone. The moment the door shut behind them, my shoulders collapsed, my breath shaking out of me like a storm breaking. Daniel stepped beside me. "Are you okay?" "For the first time," I whispered. "Yes." Margaret placed a hand on my back. "It's almost over, Olivia. The next step is the hearing. But they won't be the ones on trial." I turned toward her, heart pounding with a mixture of relief, grief, and something stronger, resolve. "Then let's finish it." The courthouse smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood, the kind of scent that clung to hallways where people came to lose or reclaim their lives. I stood just inside the entrance, my palms cold despite the warmth of my coat, watching strangers drift past me toward their own hearings, their own battles. For a moment I felt like one of them, just another person pushed into a storm she didn't ask for. But then Daniel arrived, and the moment he stepped through the doors, something inside me steadied. He looked exhausted but determined, his jaw set in a way I hadn't seen since we were kids, and he used to shield me from the neighborhood bullies. Today, though, he wasn't protecting me from playground cruelty. He was here to protect me from the sister who had tried to dismantle my entire life. "You ready?" he asked quietly. "No," I said honestly. "But I'm here." He nodded and touched my shoulder. "That's enough." Margaret found us minutes later, her arms full of folders, binders, and a thick leather portfolio. She moved with brisk confidence, her heels clicking against the marble floor in a rhythm that reminded me of a metronome, steady, precise, unwavering. "Olivia," she said, placing a reassuring hand on my arm. "Today is about clarity, not fear." Daniel's shoulders straightened at her words. "Amber's side filed no counter-evidence," Margaret continued. "None. They're walking in blind." "But she'll be there," I murmured. "I know she will." "Oh, she will," Margaret confirmed, "but she won't be prepared." The courtroom assigned to us was small, just enough rows for perhaps 20 people, and that morning only a handful of observers filled the benches. I recognized none of them. That should have comforted me, but when I saw Amber enter through the side door, my breath snagged in my chest. She looked smaller somehow. Her hair wasn't styled, her makeup was uneven, and she clutched her purse like a lifeline. Her parents flanked her, Marjorie stiff and thin-lipped, Gerald with the defeated posture of a man who knew control had slipped beyond his grasp. Tyler wasn't with them, neither was their lawyer. Amber shot me a look, not angry or triumphant, but fragile, almost frantic. For a fleeting second I saw the little girl who used to hold my hand walking to school. But then Marjorie leaned in close and whispered something that tightened Amber's expression back into its usual brittle shape. The illusion shattered. The bailiff called everyone to stand. The judge entered. A woman in her late 60s with silver hair pulled into a smooth bun, eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. Judge Hallbrook. Margaret had described her as strict, perceptive, and famously intolerant of manipulative guardianship filings. Perfect. We sat. The judge flipped open a case file. Hearing on petition for protective guardianship over Olivia Hart, filed by petitioner Amber Collins. Counsel, please introduce yourselves. Margaret rose smoothly. Margaret Reeves, representing Ms. Hart. Marjorie stood abruptly, dragging Amber with her. We're representing ourselves, Your Honor. The judge gave her an unimpressed once-over. Noted. Do you wish to call witnesses or present evidence? Yes, Marjorie said quickly. We'd like to start by explaining the emotional instability Olivia has been showing. Mrs. Hargrove, Judge Halbrook interrupted, you are not the petitioner. Your daughter is. She'll speak for herself. Marjorie froze mid-sentence. Amber slowly pushed herself to her feet. Your Honor, my sister has been unpredictable. Stop, the judge said. Do you have medical reports, psychological evaluations, or testimony from licensed professionals to support this claim? Amber blinked. I have personal observations. That is not sufficient grounds for guardianship, the judge said sharply. What other evidence do you have? Amber opened her mouth, then closed it. Well, she finally stammered, there have been concerning behaviors. Forgetfulness, paranoia, erratic decisions. Documented where? The judge asked. Amber hesitated again. In, statements we prepared. Statements written by whom? By my mother. The judge leaned back slightly. So, no professional assessments, no documented incidents, no police reports, no welfare checks, no medical diagnosis. Marjorie cut in, voice rising. Your Honor, we know Olivia. We know something is wrong with her. She's isolating herself. Refusing to sign over property is not grounds for guardianship, the judge said bluntly. Gerald stood next, face reddening. We're trying to protect her from making foolish choices. Judge Halbrook raised one eyebrow. Such as? Keeping a large estate entirely under her control, Gerald said. She doesn't understand the financial responsibility. I see, the judge said flatly. So your concern is her financial independence. Gerald faltered. The courtroom shifted. Margaret stood. Your Honor, at this time, we would like to submit evidence demonstrating the petitioner's ulterior motives. Amber whipped around, eyes wide. What? Margaret opened the leather portfolio and approached the bench with calm precision. We begin with Exhibit A, an investigative report commissioned by Olivia's late mother, containing documented patterns of past financial exploitation by the Hargrove family. The judge scanned the first page. Her eyebrows lifted. We also submit Exhibit B, a timeline of orchestrated incidents meant to fabricate cognitive decline. Amber's breath hitched. That's a lie. Exhibit C, Margaret continued, recordings of the petitioner discussing plans to liquidate Ms. Hart's assets immediately following guardianship approval. Gerald surged to his feet. What recordings? That's illegal. No, it isn't, Margaret said calmly. Wyoming is a one-party consent state. Marjorie's face blanched. Daniel stepped forward then, clearing his throat. Your Honor, I would like to testify. The judge nodded. You may. He took the stand. The bailiff swore him in. Daniel sat, shoulders squared but eyes troubled. My sister, Amber, asked me to sign documents claiming Olivia was mentally unfit. She pressured me. She told me it was the only way to save the family's future. She said our parents had done the hard work, and it was our turn to secure what they started. Amber inhaled sharply, eyes wide with betrayal. I refused, Daniel continued. She stopped speaking to me for a week. Then she tried again. She made me rehearse statements she wanted me to tell the judge. None of them were true. Marjorie slammed her palm onto the table. Daniel! Judge Halbrook didn't even look up. One more outburst and you'll be removed. Daniel's voice softened. Your Honor, Olivia has never been unstable. She's the strongest person I know. The only reason she seemed isolated was because Amber was isolating her. And when she realized she couldn't manipulate me anymore, she pushed forward without me. She didn't stop. A hush settled over the courtroom. When Daniel stepped down, Amber's entire face had collapsed inward. She looked like a building whose foundation had finally cracked. Margaret stood one last time. "Your Honor, the petition is not only unfounded, it is malicious. We request immediate dismissal with prejudice and consideration for referral to the county prosecutor." The judge exhaled heavily, removed her glasses, and rubbed the bridge of her nose. "I've seen my share of predatory petitions," she said slowly. "But this is one of the clearest attempts at assets-based guardianship coercion I've encountered." Amber let out a quiet, strangled sound. Her parents stared ahead, hollow and stunned. Judge Halbrook continued, "The petition is dismissed with prejudice. Permanently. In addition, I am referring all evidence to the Elder Protection Division and the District Attorney's Office. There are signs of forgery, coercion, conspiracy, and exploitation." Marjorie sank into her chair. Gerald closed his eyes. Amber gripped the edge of the table like it was the only thing anchoring her to reality. "Lastly," the judge added, "Ms. Collins, Ms. Hart may pursue a restraining order. I strongly recommend you avoid any further contact." The gavel fell. The hearing was over. Amber stumbled out of the courtroom like she was underwater. Marjorie grabbed her arm to steady her. Gerald followed, clutching his briefcase like a shield. I stayed still. I didn't move. I just breathed. Margaret turned to me, her voice softening. "You did well, Olivia." Daniel put an arm around me, hesitating as if asking permission. I leaned into it. "You're safe," he whispered. For the first time in months, I believed him. We walked out into the bright, cold air, sunlight sharp on the courthouse steps, the wind carrying the scent of snow from the mountains. My world wasn't fixed, not entirely, but it was mine again. Outside, Tyler stood alone, hands shoved in his pockets, eyes full of something between guilt and defeat. He looked at Amber as she climbed into her parents' car. He didn't follow. When the Hargrove vehicle drove away, leaving him standing in the parking lot like a man who'd lost the script he'd lived by for years, he finally met my gaze. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "I should have, but I didn't." Daniel stepped forward slightly, protective. Tyler nodded, kept his distance. "I'll give a statement," he said, "if you need one." Then he turned and walked away, shoulders heavy, steps slow. Margaret gathered her folders. "Olivia, the legal battle is over, but the recovery?" She offered a gentler smile. "That's yours to write next." And for the first time, I felt ready to write it. I looked up at the courthouse one more time, then turned toward the parking lot, toward Daniel, toward the life that had almost been stolen, but wasn't. Not today. Not ever again. The first morning after the hearing, I woke before the sun, the house still wrapped in the cool blue hush of early dawn. For the first time in months, I didn't wake with a jolt of anxiety knotted in my chest. No petition hanging over my head, no threat of losing my home. No shadow of Amber's scheme stretching across my life like a storm cloud. Just quiet. Honest, steady quiet. I brewed coffee and stepped out onto the porch, letting the cold Wyoming air sting my cheeks. The sky was turning a faint gold along the horizon, the mountains still silhouettes. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug and breathed. It felt like reclaiming something I'd forgotten I owned. Space inside myself. Around 8, Daniel's truck rumbled up the drive. He stepped out with a bag of groceries he didn't need to bring, and a smile I hadn't seen on him in years. A real one, not the tight, apologetic smile he'd worn under Amber's thumb. He held up a carton of eggs. "Thought I'd make breakfast. I owe you about 1,000 of them." I laughed, the sound startlingly bright in the morning air. "Come in," I said. "The kitchen's yours." We cooked together in an easy rhythm, like we were slipping back into a version of ourselves that hadn't existed since before our parents died. Eggs sizzling, coffee brewing again, Daniel humming under his breath as he dug through my spice cabinet. When he handed me a plate steaming and perfect, he said, "I didn't think I'd ever feel like your brother again." I met his eyes. You didn't lose that. It was buried. But it's here. Still here." His throat tightened. He nodded. We ate at the table, sunlight warming the hardwood floors. For a few precious minutes, we didn't talk about Amber, the hearing, the investigation, or the future. We just sat, and breathed, and existed as siblings again. Later that afternoon, Margaret arrived with a stack of documents for my signature, the last steps in closing the case. She brought pastries from a bakery downtown, setting them on the kitchen counter like it was a celebration. In a way, it was. She handed me a pen. These finalized the restraining order, the dismissal with prejudice, and the referral package to the district attorney's office. I scanned the pages. Each signature felt like stitching shut the tear Amber had ripped in my life. When I set the pen down, Margaret gave me a small, triumphant smile. "You're officially protected. Legally, financially, structurally, they can't touch you." Relief washed over me. Not loud or overwhelming, but deep and quiet, settling into my bones. "Thank you," I whispered, "for everything." Margaret shook her head. "Thank your mother. She saw further than any of us." My chest tightened at the mention of her. Every step of this fight felt like following a map she'd drawn, each defense she'd built becoming a lifeline I didn't know I'd need. "I wish she was here," I said softly. Margaret touched my hand. "She is. In every page of that trust, in every warning she documented, in every protection she built with you in mind." I swallowed against the ache in my throat. She was right. Mom had been here long before Amber ever showed her teeth. 3 weeks later, the investigation into the Hargroves escalated. A county social worker called me to request a statement. Then another call came, from the State Elder Protection Task Force. They had questions about the forged signatures, the financial manipulations, the timeline Daniel documented. I answered everything, not with anger, not with vengeance, but with clarity. Amber's actions were wrong, documented, intentional, and part of a larger pattern echoed in the investigator's report from years ago. A pattern that needed breaking. Then came the unexpected. A letter addressed to me arrived from Tyler. I found it in my mailbox one evening. The envelope slightly crumpled like he'd been nervous even putting it there. Inside was a handwritten note. "Olivia, I'm sorry. I didn't know how far they were willing to go. I didn't know how much they'd already done before I met Amber. I should have questioned more. I should have protected Daniel. And you. If the investigators need anything, I'll cooperate. I hope you find peace. Tyler." I read it twice. Then tucked it away in a drawer. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, just acknowledgement. A small, quiet closing of a door I didn't need open. Amber didn't write. Not once. I heard through Daniel that she'd moved back in with their parents while the investigation unfolded. Marjorie and Gerald's finances collapsed completely. Foreclosure finalized, savings drained by legal fees, their facade of wealth stripped away. The distance between us didn't sting the way I thought it would. It felt like a necessary boundary, a line I should have drawn years ago. Meanwhile, Daniel and I began rebuilding something real. He came by every few days, sometimes to help repair the barn roof, sometimes to bring food, sometimes just to sit on the porch where the afternoon sun turned everything warm. He started therapy. He joined a support group for people recovering from manipulation by controlling partners. And slowly, he began finding his own voice again. One evening, as we sanded down a set of old wooden chairs for refinishing, he said, "Mom would be proud of you." I paused, wiping dust from my hands. "Proud of us." He smiled. "Yeah, proud of us." As autumn slipped toward winter, the house that had once felt so large and hollow began feeling alive again. I reopened my mother's vegetable garden, clearing the weeds and turning the soil. Daniel built raised beds. We planted winter greens under cold frames. The first sprouts appeared in early frost, a small, stubborn promise of renewal. On weekends, I drove into town for the volunteer training sessions I'd signed up for. Margaret had connected me with an elder advocacy network. They needed speakers, mentors, and community liaisons, people who could spot warning signs before harm was done, people who had lived through it, people who could stand with the vulnerable and say, "You are not alone." One afternoon, after a long meeting with the nonprofit board, Margaret met me outside with coffee in hand. "You're a natural," she said. "They're lucky to have you." I sipped the coffee, letting the warmth sink into my fingers. "I don't know about that." "I do," she replied. "Most people only fight for themselves. You're fighting for others." I looked out over the parking lot, sunlight reflecting off the windshields. "Maybe because I know what it feels like to not have anyone fighting for you." Margaret nodded, thoughtful. "Then your foundation will matter all the more." I blinked at her. "My foundation?" "The one we talked about," she said lightly. "The Heart Foundation. You're ready, Olivia." I felt my pulse thrum softly at the idea, protecting others the way my mother protected me, building something strong and enduring, turning pain into purpose. "Yeah," I said quietly. "I think I am." We launched the Heart Foundation 3 months later. A modest beginning. Legal resources, financial education sessions, community outreach for vulnerable adults. Daniel volunteered to help with data management. Margaret joined the board. A retired investigator offered to consult pro bono. People reached out from across the state, then beyond. Some wanted help. Some offered help. Some just wanted to share their stories, to say out loud what they'd held in silence too long. Every message reminded me why this fight mattered. Why Mom built a fortress around me. Why I was meant to open its doors for others. Winter came early that year, snow dusting the fields, the mountains turning silver, my house glowing warm against the cold. On the anniversary of my mother's passing, Daniel and I drove to the cemetery with flowers, yellow chrysanthemums, her favorite. We stood by her stone in the crisp winter air, breath turning white. I knelt down, setting the flowers gently against the base. "Mom," I whispered, "you saved my life. More than once." Daniel rested a hand on my shoulder. "We're okay now, because of you." The wind stirred the edges of the bouquet, lifting a few petals. I closed my eyes, letting the peace settle in my chest. A peace I hadn't felt in years. A peace she had wanted for me. When spring came, I reopened the porch windows and let the fresh air sweep through the house. I planted new rose bushes along the fence line. Daniel helped install solar panels on the barn roof. Volunteers visited the property to discuss hosting community workshops. The house became a place of healing, not just for me, but for others. A place where people came to feel safe. A place where something dark had almost happened but didn't. A place where love, protection, and resilience were not just memories, but living things. And sometimes, as the sun set over the fields, turning the sky pink and gold, I felt something warm in my chest, something like my mother's hand resting lightly over mine. A reminder that storms can take many things, peace, trust, relationships, but they can't take who you become after surviving them. They can't take the strength forged in the aftermath. They can't take the purpose built from the ruins. This story began with a dinner invitation meant to humiliate me, meant to weaken me, meant to break me. Instead, it revealed the truth. It exposed betrayal. It rebuilt a family. It awakened a fight inside me I didn't know I was capable of. And it reminded me that the people who underestimate quiet strength often learn too late what it can unleash. If you've stayed with me until now, thank you, truly. I'd love to hear from you. Tell me which moment stood out the most, or share your own story if you've ever felt taken advantage of by people you trusted. Your voices shape the stories we tell next, and your support helps this community grow stronger every day. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so you never miss the next chapter. I'll be here, ready to tell it with you.